In this video, Jordan Peterson explains why people get bitter and revengeful in life.
Let me show you this figure again. So basically what you have here in this figure, this is a world conception. And the world conception is roughly, there's an individual, positive and negative. He or she is in a cultural sphere, that's positive or negative. That's embedded in the world outside of culture, that's positive and negative, and all of it comes from potential. That's the idea. Now, this map shows all of the positives and negatives in relationship to one another. And you see, it's not perfectly symmetrical, and the reason for that is, as far as I can tell, the adversarial element of the individual is the thing that generates the tyrannical element of culture. And that's the thing that, gets in your way of establishing a creative relationship with what you don't know. Well, anyways, here is a manifestation of that, I believe. And I like this manifestation because, it's obviously Christian, but not exactly. It's more mythological than Christian. And the reason for that, well, is quite obvious. So the superordinate figure is Mary, the feminine. Now you think, well, it's amazing the person who carved this just didn't get burnt up at the Inquisition, because it's a radical idea, but it's just an indication of how the mythology can change the causal relationship between these different elements. So you have Mary there, she's the ultimate in femininity, ultimate feminine deity, but only the positive side, right? And then within her, so it's like nature opens itself up, and benevolent nature opens itself up. And what you see inside is culture, that's God the Father, holding the individual. And the individual in this case is the crucified Christ, which is a wonderful conceptualization as far as I'm concerned, because of course that is what life does to people. That's why that's such a powerful symbol. It's Christ is the person who has to face the reality of his own death, voluntarily or involuntarily, who's betrayed by his culture, betrayed by his friends. It's sort of like he's exposed to the most torturous elements of individual being, and simultaneously, at least in principle, transcends them. Well, you bloody well better do that, because otherwise, well, what's going to happen? You're done if you don't do that. And it's even worse. It's not only that you fail, that's just the beginnings of it. If you can't transcend the tragedy of your being, then you get corrupted, because I see this happening to people all the time. So, if you're suffering and you can't cope with it, generally speaking, what happens is that it embitters you. And once you get bitter, you get resentful. And once you get resentful, you look for revenge. And that can just get completely out of hand. Now, that's a quick trip to the worst suburb of the underworld, that's for sure. So, it's not only that if you don't manage this transcendent act, that you're swamped by the tragedy of your life. It's worse than that. You're swamped by the tragedy of your life, and then that corrupts you, and then you start working to make everything even more tragic than it has to be. And so I think that's why in medieval Christian conceptualizations in particular, that the idea of hell, the idea that you were destined to hell was worse than the idea of dying. And that's a strange idea, because you think, this is what the terror management theorists think too, is there's nothing worse than the fear of death. That's wrong. They don't have the right imagination. There are lots of things that are worse than the fear of death. So, I'm not trying to trivialize the fear of death, obviously, but I don't think it's very difficult to understand that there are some things that you would rather die than do. I mean, I'm sure that I could get you guys to sit for 15 minutes and say, okay, list 10 things that you would rather die than do. Oh, that's easy. That's easy. Especially if you're a parent, you can think of those things in no time flat. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. So you've got the superordinate feminine figure here, which is not what you'd expect from a Christian representation, right? you'd expect God to be on the outside, and then Mary, and then Christ in all likelihood. Although that would also be a valid representation, right? So, because you can think of the mother as something that's protected by the culture, and supporting the individual, because that's basically what this representation shows. But then you see on the open sides, I really like this, I think it's so cool, is that you've got all these people who aren't archetypal figures, they're in a little crowd, and they're gazing at the central figure. And of course that's exactly what's happened in Christianity for 2,000 years, right? Insofar as it's spread, is that for 2,000 years people have been looking at that image, which is the crucifixion, transfixed by it. Well, why? Well, for reasons that we don't understand. When everybody woke up in like the late 1800s and said, why were we looking at that for the last 2,000 years? The first answer was, well, we really don't have the foggiest idea. It was just one of the things that we did, roughly speaking. It encapsulated people within the belief system. So that's another good example anyway of how this archetypal imagery can manifest itself, say, spontaneously in the imagination of an artist. And the thing is that's a sacred image, and it is in actuality, that's what it is. What it shows is, well, there's a superordinate, transcendent, natural order that has a beneficial element that we associate with femininity, and inside that there's a supportive culture is properly nested if things are organized properly, and it's both of those things that provide support for the suffering individual. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much got it.